In our final video, I'll share some suggestions for writing a poem on the theme of a city for tomorrow. Poetry is a form of writing where we express our ideas and feelings in an intense and artistic way, using a range of techniques that you might have heard of, such as imagery, rhythm, sound, similes, metaphors, just to name a few. Poems can also vary in how they look. So not only just the techniques you use, but how they look. So you might have a poem that looks quite structured. You can see that it's broken into verses or stanzas, and they're equally 4 lines each. Or you might have something on a page, which is kind of really fun to do, which is more free-flowing and free-form. This is called free verse poetry. One thing I want to mention right now is that people often think of poetry as rhyming, and indeed many poems, particularly in the past, have rhymed, and children's poetry, a lot of children enjoy rhyme a lot, but poems do not have to rhyme. So that will be a choice that you make later on when you're planning your poem. So poetry is an ancient art form, and it existed even before writing was invented. It's thought that originally it was sung or performed as a way of retelling stories. Given that poetry's been around longer than writing itself, there are lots of different forms to choose from. I'm going to show you one example in this video, but feel free to do some research about different forms of poetry and to write your own. One of the first things to think about before you start writing a poem is what you do really care about. Robert Frost, who was a very famous American poet, said, it's one of my favourite sayings about poetry, a poem begins with a lump in your throat. So in other words, to achieve the intensity in the writing of a poem, you need to write about something you deeply care about or bring some sort of strong feeling. So look at your mind map. What do you really care about in your city for tomorrow? Is it the health of our planet? Is it the future of animals and species that are becoming extinct? Is it about climate change or pollution? Is it about homelessness? Is it about how we treat each other? Making sure that we're all living in some kind of harmony. Or maybe your intensity is an excitement about the technology and the amazing cityscape that you've created in your mind. Perhaps it's the vivid, shiny city that you're thinking about that you'd like to capture in a poem. So, before writing a poem, I always start off by collecting my best words. This is called a word bank. Get yourself a piece of paper and write the 3 headings: noun, adjectives and verbs. Start thinking about your mind map and look at some of the images, perhaps look at some photos of futuristic cityscapes or objects. Think about the objects. I've just given one example here, flying car. Now what would be an adjective I could use would be metallic, a verb that might go with it, zooming. Keep going like this until you fill the columns. Another example might be, another noun I might see in my city would be rooftop gardens. And I could have the words lush or fragrant. And then I could have the word breathing. Maybe it's helping our city to breathe. So as you start filling in your word bank, you might have some pretty cool phrases that just start magically appearing in your mind. So, for example, I might have metallic cars zoom the skyway, or I might have lush rooftop gardens perfume the city. If you're a younger writer, aim to get about 5 words in each column, but if you're a high school student, challenge yourself, 10 or 15 words. The more work you do at this point, the easier it will be to write your poem. So the type of poem I think will capture a city for tomorrow really well is a sensory poem. So a sensory poem is basically a poem where we capture images. Now I've put 3 images for each sense, but you might be able to come up with more, or maybe 5 for what you see and only a couple for what you taste. But what you do is you use your senses to bring to life some vivid details. That's how we make sense of the world. So it's you go through each of these. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? What do you feel? And with feeling, we think about both what we feel in terms of our touch, but also our emotions. So, and don't forget, you've already collected some incredible words here. So make sure that you use some of them in the images that you create here. Grab yourself a highlighter pen and go through and highlight or circle the strongest images. There will be some words or phrases that really pop off the page to you, so make sure that you highlight those. So coming back to rhyme, one of the first decisions to make is whether you want to rhyme your poem or not. And remember, you don't have to rhyme, but if you choose to, I've just come up with some suggestions here. I usually start by getting my first line. So I've written here, metallic cars zoom through the skyway. And you can see I've marked it A. I'm going to do the simple scheme of A, A, B, B. So I need to rhyme my end word here with my first end word. And voila comes my second line, carrying people who once drove old highways. Okay, so now I'm going to look at a different rhyming word. Their supersonic engines don't make a sound except for a squeal as their wheels touch the ground. So a useful thing to do is to write out your scheme down the right hand side of your page. You might even want to try and brainstorm rhyming words so that it becomes easier to write. But as I said, not every poem has to rhyme. And for some people it's really helpful, other people it blocks their imagination. So, if you want to write a free verse, I've got suggestions for both junior and writers in primary age, and also a more challenging version of this. So for younger writers, I'd suggest writing a verse about each sense. Perhaps you could use a repeating line to carry you through the poem. So you don't have to use this line, but in this example, I've put, in my city, I see metallic cars zoom the skyway. In my city, I smell rooftop gardens that perfume the city. You see I've repeated my word there, so I actually would probably replace that by using my thesaurus, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And just go through, you might actually be able to come up with 2 or 3 images and grow your verses so they're a bit longer than I've got here. And with your concluding line, you just have a really strong image. My city is. So if you had to really sum it up, put your strongest line here. So that's some suggestions for younger writers. However, if you're a more experienced writer or a high school student, you could still use your senses, but perhaps you could mix them up in the verses and make the structure less obvious. You could also play around with the visual appearance of the poem. You can think about your blank page like a canvas and just have some fun with it. So, for example, it is dawn in my city. I hear the soft whir of cars flying across the brightening sky. And you can keep going, again, going back to the images that you've already collected in both your